What is the best fitness tracker? Today, I want to talk about three of the heavy hitters in the fitness tracker and wearable world with the Apple Watch, the Oura Ring, as well as the Whoop Band. These are three of the devices that most people are either shopping for or wanting to know the comparison of. And I want to take a look at what I think are some of the most important factors when it comes to these devices and deciding which one is going to help you perform your best. Because at the end of the day, that's what understanding your recovery and fitness metrics is all about. It's how can you recover better and perform better. So this is an important consideration to make at some point in your performance career, whether mentally or physically, especially. Tracking and understanding how you recover, what helps you recover better, and what changes you're going to see over your life cycle is an important part of the recovery equation and the performance equation. So you can get some great data from a fitness tracker like one of these wearables in order to make this informed decision about your recovery. And the thing that these do better than you can subjectively measure with something like simple pen and paper and just recording how do you feel on a scale from 1 to 10. So your recovery score, your sleep score, and maybe your energy score, the three that I like to do if I'm looking at this subjectively and trying to avoid using fitness trackers and just build that internal awareness. These devices measure HRV or heart rate variability, which to me is one of the best metrics that you can use in order to understand your recovery. And HRV is great because it takes into account how your nervous system is doing and how it's recovering so that you can understand those trends in your recovery. That's an important point to make about these devices is regardless of which one you choose, the short-term answer is not going to be that informative to what you need to know about your recovery. It's all about looking at the trends over time, and that's going to help you to understand and build that internal awareness of your recovery so that you can ditch the device later on if you don't want to use it anymore, or at least you also understand what's going on and you're able to make those decisions around your performance and recovery based on what you're learning. And the other thing to think about before looking at the pros and cons of each of these devices individually is understanding that inconsistency is inevitable. Regardless of which device you choose to go with, these are consumer level devices, not as accurate or precise as medical lab testing for different recovery metrics. So you're going to have some level of error or some level of inconsistency in the results that you're simply going to have to accept and work with. And that's why I think that looking at the trends rather than any individual score is so much more important for looking at your recovery and knowing what's going on. The trends over time lie a lot less than the individual scores and are also going to be more consistent across different devices. Now, because each of these devices has some degree of inconsistency in the results that you're going to get, and you're looking at more the long-term trends, the number one thing that I think is most important is to consider how do you want to wear the device. The Oura Ring fitting on a finger is something that's great for not being very intrusive or distracting when you're sleeping. But to me, it's a device that I would never wear during training or intense exercise because, if you're doing pull-ups and your finger gets caught on the bar, I don't want to lose a finger. Can't wear it when doing deadlifts or any type of barbell work. It's to me the least likely to fit the mold for the type of training I'm doing. I'm sure that it's great if you're just doing cardio or maybe you're doing light lifting and you don't necessarily grip a barbell a whole lot, but it doesn't work for me for training. I think it's great for sleep tracking. And fortunately, I have the Generation 2 one that doesn't require any membership. So it's great for just some simple sleep tracking readiness scores and looking at HRV. But other than that, it's not my number one pick. Now with the Apple Watch, it seems like the most logical place to have a fitness tracker is on your wrist. And with a screen on it, it's very easy to glance at the data and have a look at it. It is a little more distracting or bulky, and a lot of people struggle with sleeping wearing an Apple Watch because of the size and kind of distractive nature of it, especially if you don't put it into sleep mode. And then the Whoop similarly also fits on your wrist as the most common placement for it. But the advantage there also is that if you're doing weightlifting or jujitsu or any other martial arts where you want to remove it from your wrist, there are a lot of different clothing options that Whoop sells that you can input this device into or insert this device into that allows you to not have it on your wrist when you are training or competing. So because the Whoop is able to pull apart and slide right out of the band, you can use this little tracker and insert it into things like their underwear shorts that they sell or their leggings or even the strap that can fit on your arm so that it's not on your wrist and impeding things like lifting straps if you're doing weightlifting, for example. I also liked wearing it during Ultimate Frisbee because I didn't have to have something on my wrist in order to do the fitness tracking, and I definitely didn't want to have a watch on while playing Ultimate Frisbee, but I was still able to get the fitness tracking with the Whoop. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of each device, starting with the Apple Watch. Now, I've come to depend on this for a lot of things in my life. That's why I upgraded to the Apple Watch Ultra for that extra battery life. I use it all day long for some simple things like setting timers so I don't forget anything at work, as well as having notifications go off for things like the door sensor so I know when somebody's entering in the door and other notifications like that, which to me are super important and critical to my daily life, is why the Apple Watch is something that I've started to use as the primary fitness tracker as well, just so that I'm not trying to pay attention to multiple devices at one time. And something that once I got used to sleeping with this on, I've come to depend on the wake up alarm with the Apple Watch as well, because it's got that gentle haptic vibration that taps your wrist as a way to wake up. And so I no longer use any audible alarms in the morning, which to me is a much more natural wake up and less stressful than having the annoying, default alarm clock sounds going off that kind of launches you straight into a stressed out state first thing in the morning. Now, Whoop does something similar, but with the Whoop's wake up, I've started to find that the vibration from it is annoying compared to that more natural feeling of the Taptic engine in the Apple Watch. And so I don't really like the wake up vibration on this as much anymore. I also find that trying to do the double tap to get it to shut off is very inconsistent on whether it works or not. And so that's one of the reasons why I've also started to like using this as my wake up alarm much more than the Whoop. And with the latest updates to the software on the Apple Watch, they now have something called training load, which allows you to get different senses of that strain or recovery scores. And your Vitals app on the Apple Watch also is taking over some of those other metrics, and especially the displays or the visuals of those metrics that we used to only get on things like the Whoop or the Oura Ring. It's now made it much more user-friendly compared to just going into the health app and looking at the data that you could always find in the Apple Watch. And I actually really like the training load app because of the ability to enter in your own ratings of perceived exertion or RPE and changing your perceived effort on different workouts. This is something that with the strain scores you automatically get in Whoop, you don't have that subjective input I think that because of this, the Training Load app is actually really useful for weightlifting and training because you're able to subjectively add in your inputs to adjust what your training load or your training volume looks like rather than having to go into the complicated strength training app that's in the Whoop. And people often complain about the lack of HRV being included in the Vitals app that's now on the Apple Watch. But to me, it's not that big of a deal. If you still go into the Health app on your phone, you can set up HRV to be one of the metrics that's listed in your favorites right pinned to the homepage of the Health app. So it's very easy to still look at your HRV numbers and score with the Apple Watch, and you don't necessarily need it in the Vitals app or in the Training Load app at all. Now, the downside of the Apple Watch, which can also be an upside depending on your situation, is it does have that screen. And so therefore the battery life is much less than these other devices that you can get several days or even a week's worth of battery life out of. Whereas with the Apple Watch, you're typically going to be charging it at least once a day or once every day and a half. And it can also be much more distracting depending on how you use it and how many notifications you have on or what you do in order to improve that sort of digital minimalism of your devices and reduce those notifications coming in. Now, the Oura Ring is said to have the most accurate sleep tracking specifically. So if sleep tracking is what you want to care about the most for recovery, this might be worth considering. And it started out primarily as a sleep tracker, and that's where it really shines in its usage. It's starting to incorporate more of the other metrics and health scores throughout the day. I haven't tested that out quite as much because I've got a Gen 2 Oura Ring before it started to include as many of the useful daily and daytime features. So when I use this, it's mostly as a sleep tracker and to get more input from comparing these other devices for sleep tracking or looking at my sleep specifically through it. And now, just like the Whoop, Oura Ring has also started to introduce memberships in order to unlock the most data out of the device. And this has somewhat changed my perspective on the Oura Ring and something that I probably won't consider upgrading to a future version of the device for, because I don't necessarily want to be paying a monthly membership fee for this information that can be unlocked otherwise with things just like the Apple Watch. So if I only wanted an overnight tracking device and I cared about things like the least noticeable or least distracting device for sleep, as well, Oura Ring's got the great ability to turn off and put it into airplane mode. So if you want to minimize EMFs when you're sleeping, this is kind of the best option that you have. And so those would be the only reasons that I'd consider it more so. But as I mentioned, I don't use it as a device for any like training or fitness tracking. And so it's not as useful there for me. And now the Whoop. I wore the Whoop for more than a year when I first got it, because for one, you kind of have to, you're locked into getting the membership in order to get the device, which is okay because it's baked into the price of the device. So you can either pay upfront or pay monthly and get the device for free when you pay monthly. But after that, I wasn't using it as often. It wasn't providing any extra data compared to the Apple Watch or the Oura Ring that I already had. And I didn't want to keep paying the monthly subscription fee for it, especially because when I came back to it and revisited it for doing this review specifically, I found that there are a lot of buggy features and inconsistent measurements with this device that were downright frustrating to make use of. A couple of times in the past few months using the Whoop, comparing it to the data from the Apple Watch and going on walks where, the Apple Watch showed my heart rate was no more than 120 beats per minute, I'd be getting strain scores of over 10 for that walk on the Whoop. And that's because it was recording my heart rate maxing out at 168 for the entire length of a 20 or 30-minute walk, which made absolutely no sense. There's no way that that was what my heart rate was doing. And this wasn't just a one-off thing. It happened multiple times. I don't know why it was doing that, but to me, things like that glitching out and then therefore impacting what your recovery score looks like or your strain score looks like just made no sense for the device. And I also found the opposite result sometimes in training, where my max heart rate would be 165 or 172 doing a sprint workout on the spin bike, and the Whoop would be showing that my heart rate was much lower than that and getting inconsistent results the other way. So I don't know what's going on with some of these measurements and what the Whoop is spitting out for its performance scores, but to me that inconsistency was frustrating. I also never made use of the strength training app because I also don't want to have to go in and manually input so much of that data, whether during a workout or before the workout, into the Whoop app. I just find that it's still not where it needs to be in order to be a genuinely useful device for strength training specifically. Now, one of the other use cases where you may want to use the Whoop is if you're flexible in your wake up time, because it's got that ability to adjust your alarm or your wake up time based on whether you want to just perform or you want to hit your peak of sleep score and recovery. And then it's going to adjust your wake up time. Now, that never happens for me. I wake up at the same time every day. But if I were in a situation where I wanted to do more of that and get more sleep, I think that the Whoop is great as another way to sort of accentuate your recovery and performance through changing your sleep cycle and wake up times. And then finally, I want to talk very quickly about the Fitbit, because in recent years, Fitbit has made some improvements in what it can measure, as well as some of the accuracy of the results. I still find that it tends to be the most inconsistent. I don't actually use one myself, but looking at some clients' data and some friends' data on their devices, you can track things like HRV on Fitbits now. So it could be really useful, especially as like an entry-level device, because they tend to be a lot cheaper than these other devices. So that's one more way you can consider going if you're looking to just get started or want some simple metrics for tracking your performance and recovery scores. So those are my thoughts. I'd also love to know what your thoughts are on these different devices. What are the pros and cons that stand out most to you? Remember, don't complicate things when it comes to these devices. It's more about what is the device and the usage that you can adhere to the longest, because you need to look at those trends over time and understand and build that subjective awareness of your performance and of your recovery. So these tools should be an aid, but not something you depend on long term in order to really understand your performance. Don't get caught closing rings and pushing strain scores just for the sake of it. Make use of these devices to understand what you really need the most so that you can continue to perform your best and find your flow.